I never told this story to anyone, not to my wife, not to my children, not to the priest who heard my confession every first Sunday of the month for 40 years. I kept it for 56 years, not because I was ashamed, not because I was afraid, but because some things are so heavy that you can't turn them into words without feeling like you're breaking something sacred. My name is Thomas Earl Booker. I'm 79 years old. And in 1969, I was a combat medic with the 1st Cavalry Division in Vietnam, Quảng Trị Province, in the north of the country, where the war was more brutal than anything you've ever seen in a movie or read in a book. I held many men as they died. It's part of the job of a medic. You learn to do it without falling apart inside. You learn to separate what you're feeling from what you need to do. You learn to be two people at the same time. The professional keeping pressure on the wound, and the human being praying in silence that this 19-year-old boy won't die in your arms before the helicopter arrives. But there's one night I couldn't separate. One night in September of 1969 that changed everything I thought I knew about God, about war, about what a man carries when he comes home. And what Danny Callahan said to me that night, the last words he spoke before he died, I never repeated to anyone until today. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand who I was. I was 23 years old. I had grown up in Columbus, Georgia, the son of a Baptist preacher and a nurse. From childhood, my home was a place where sickness and faith coexisted naturally. My mother cared for bodies, my father cared for souls, and I grew up believing it was possible to do both at the same time. When I was drafted in 1968, I asked to be a combat medic. Not because it was safer, it wasn't. Medics were priority targets because the enemy knew that taking out the doctor meant taking away the soldier's hope. I asked because it was the only role that made sense to me. I didn't want to carry a rifle. I wanted to carry morphine, bandages, plasma. I arrived in Vietnam in March of 1969 with the conviction that God had placed me there for a reason. I left different. Quảng Trị was what soldiers called the meat grinder. It was a stretch of land near the demilitarized zone, the border between North and South Vietnam, where the fighting never stopped. The 1st Cavalry had been assigned to that region after the Tet Offensive of 1968, and by the time I arrived, the earth was so marked by mortar craters, it looked like another planet. The first months I ran on autopilot. Saw wounded, treated wounded, saw dead, documented dead. I learned not to ask the name before treating the wound. I learned that asking the name made it harder when there was nothing left to do. It was in July of 1969 that I met Danny Callahan. Danny was 19 years old and came from a small town in rural Tennessee called Cookeville. He was tall, thin, with a laugh you could hear from far away. The kind of laugh that doesn't belong in any war, that seems to belong to another world, another time. He had arrived in Vietnam 2 months before me, but he looked like he'd arrived yesterday. He had that thing in his eyes, the ability to still be surprised, to still find it strange that this was actually happening. Most soldiers lose that in the first few weeks. Danny still had it. We got close by accident. One afternoon in July, he came to me with a scratch on his arm that didn't need a medic at all. It was clearly an excuse to talk. He told me his father was a preacher, that he had grown up in the church, that he had brought a Bible in his uniform pocket because his mother had insisted. I told him my father was a preacher too. He looked at me like I'd said I was an alien. "You're a preacher's son, and you became a combat medic in Vietnam?" I said it was the same thing, just with more blood. He laughed, that loud laugh, which echoed through the camp and made some soldiers turn their heads. That's when we started talking for real. Over the following weeks, Danny and I shared a lot. We shared meals. We shared silence on the nights when the noise outside was too heavy to pretend everything was fine. He would tell me about Cookville, about the girlfriend he had left behind, about the plan to go back, open a hardware store with his older brother, get married, have children. He had a plan, a specific plan with details. The name of the store had already been decided. I had learned to distrust soldiers with specific plans, not out of superstition, out of experience. The ones who planned with the most detail seemed more vulnerable to believing the future was guaranteed. And in Vietnam, nothing was guaranteed. But Danny planned with such certainty that for a moment I almost believed alongside him. One night he asked me if I still prayed.
Maybe not for the right reasons,
yes.
But I prayed. I prayed with the same automaticity as a reflex trained since childhood, without being entirely sure who was on the other side listening. He said he prayed too, that he prayed specifically, not to die afraid. I don't pray not to die, he said. Everyone dies. I pray not to die afraid. I carried that with me. It was the early morning of September 14th, 1969. We were on patrol about 3 kilometers north of camp, in an area of dense jungle that the maps marked as pacified, which in Vietnam meant there had been less than a week since the last enemy contact. The attack came without warning. It came from 3 directions at once, which meant we had walked straight into an ambush. In the first 30 seconds, I lost track of everything. It was darkness, noise, the smell of gunpowder and wet earth, and someone screaming my name. Doc! Doc Booker! The medic instinct takes over before fear can settle in. You move toward the scream before you decide to move. Your body goes while your mind is still trying to understand what's happening. I found Danny 15 meters from where I was. He had taken 2 shots, one in the right shoulder, which was serious but treatable, and one in the abdomen, which was something else entirely. Abdominal wound from a high-velocity round. In the field, without immediate surgery available, the statistics were clear. I knew before I got close to him. I knew from the angle he was lying, from the way he held his own stomach, from the expression on his face. Not of pain, but of confusion, as if his body hadn't yet sent his brain the full message about what had happened. I worked fast. I did what I could with what I had. Applied pressure, applied morphine, shouted into the radio for emergency evacuation. Checked his vital signs with my fingers while the combat continued around us. And then Danny grabbed my wrist. With his left hand, his right was disabled by the shoulder shot. He grabbed me with a strength I didn't expect from someone in that state. He grabbed me and pulled me close. Doc. Don't talk, I said. Save your energy. The helicopter is coming. Doc. His voice was low, but firm. It wasn't the tone of someone delirious with pain. It was the tone of someone who knows exactly what they're saying. Look at me. I looked. His eyes were completely lucid. That's what broke me inside. The lucidity. There was no confusion, no panic. There was a strange clarity, as if the pain had revealed something rather than concealed it. I'm not getting out of here, he said. Yes, you are. Stay quiet. Thomas. It was the first time he had used my real name without the doc. Look me in the eyes and tell me I'm going to make it out of here. I couldn't. I couldn't lie while looking directly into his eyes. And he knew. From the silence, he knew. He was quiet for a moment. The combat was still happening around us, but where the two of us were, it seemed like the sound had dimmed, as if there was a bubble around us. Then Danny Callahan said something to me, and that is what I carried for 56 years without telling anyone. He turned his face to the side for a moment, toward the dark jungle, toward nothing in particular. And when he looked back at me, there was an expression I had no name for in that moment. It took me decades to find the right word. The word is peace. Not resignation, not disguised despair. Real peace. He said, "I'm not afraid." He paused, breathed deep, which clearly cost him, then continued, "I prayed not to die afraid, and I'm not afraid. So everything is all right." I held his hand tighter. I didn't know what to say. There's no training for that moment. No medic's manual covers what to do when the patient is in more peace than you are. But he wasn't finished. "There's something I need you to do for me," he said. I told him I would do it. "Don't keep this for yourself. What's happening right now? What you're feeling right now? Don't keep it. This wasn't made to be kept." I didn't understand in that moment what he meant. "You're going to carry a lot of things when you leave here," Danny continued. "Every medic does. But don't let it become weight. Weight kills slower than a bullet, but it kills just the same." He stopped. His breathing was getting harder. "Tell someone," he said. "When the right time comes, don't keep it." Those were the last words Danny Callahan spoke. The helicopter arrived 11 minutes later. 11 minutes too late. I came home in March of 1970. I came home, finished medical school, married Carol in 1974, had 3 children, worked as a physician for 32 years, volunteered in Africa, Kenya, Mozambique, Rwanda, saw more death and more survival than any man should see in a single life. And I carried Danny Callahan with me through all of it. Not as trauma, as weight. Exactly the weight he had asked me not to carry. I didn't tell anyone because I thought that moment belonged only to him and to me. I thought that if I put it into words, it would diminish. That the holiness of that moment wouldn't fit in common language. It took me 56 years to understand I was wrong. The thing didn't stay sacred by being kept. It became heavy. And what Danny meant that night, this wasn't made to be kept, wasn't about the story. It was about the lesson. It was about what that moment had to teach. A 19-year-old boy, dying in a jungle on the other side of the world, found enough peace to comfort the man who was trying to save him. Found enough clarity to leave me a message that took half a century for me to truly hear. He wasn't afraid because he had prayed not to be. And that prayer was answered, not in the way he wanted, but in the only way that mattered. I think about that every time I pray today. I don't pray to get what I want. I pray to have what I need to endure whatever comes. It was a 19-year-old boy from Cookeville, Tennessee, who taught me that. If you're watching this all the way to here, there's a reason. Maybe you're carrying something you haven't told anyone. Maybe you know someone who is. Maybe you just need to hear that it's possible to reach the end of a long life without having resolved everything, and that that's not failure. Danny didn't resolve anything. He died with 21 years of life lived in a place where he shouldn't have been, for reasons none of us could quite explain. But he died without fear. And 56 years later, a 79-year-old man is here, telling the story he promised, without having promised to tell. Don't keep it. That's what he said. So I didn't keep it anymore. If there's something you're keeping, a story, a weight, a memory you think is too large to fit into words, I want you to know that I've heard stories that seemed too large. And not one of them became smaller for having been told. Not one. My name is Thomas Earl Booker. I'm 79 years old, and I was a combat medic in Vietnam. I'll see you next week.